Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Gareth Jones. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to be here.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for giving us your time today to talk about your research on the foundation of Christianity in first century Britain. But first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in this subject?
Yeah, of course. My interests go right back to my childhood. I've always been interested in religion and the origins of religion, similarities between different religions and so on. And then through that and reading books by people like Barron and Blackett and so on, I then got very interested in my more local history, because I live in Barry in South Wales. So, when you hear about people like St Lucius, King Lucius, and David and St Fagin and all the rest of it, I grew up playing in St David's churchyard.
Wow.
The story of the well where he was supposed to have died. It was there still when I was a kid. We used to throw stones down into the bottom of the well. So it really piqued my interest then. And martyred major, obviously, big interest for me in Caerleon. So when I got fed up with building, when I was about 50 years old, I decided to go to university and study religion and philosophy.
Well, at age 50, wow.
Yeah. And then in 2017, 2018, I took my master's in, they couldn't find me a lecturer who would pigeonhole me. So they put me in late antique and Byzantium studies, which meant basically the end of the Roman Empire.
Wow.
And I managed to find myself a professor who would look after me, and it happened to be a guy called Peter Guest, who was the lead archaeologist on Caerleon and Caerwent, which was ideal for me. But I was told all the way through, because I was looking into people like Joseph from Arimathea and so on, that most lecturers wouldn't touch me with a barge pole.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was lucky that he decided to help me.
On board. Yeah. When I recently visited Llandaff Cathedral, I was chatting with the volunteer on the door, and we're talking about Britain's hidden history, and she straight away asked, well, where is the written evidence for Britain's hidden history?
Yeah.
And I know from Margaret's time in the legal profession that written evidence is of paramount importance, especially in the law. So maybe we should start talking about the description of early writing. Okay. Who invented it and where did they start it?
Well, Britain being a Druidic society, first of all, they didn't have written writing so much. Everything was oral. It was put down in poetry and songs. So, that gave us what we know as the Welsh triads and so on, which when it was put down in writing in the 7th century, that's the earliest sort of British writing that we have. But there are other people who wrote about it. One of our local saints, St Gildas, who taught who was a disciple of St Illtyd at Martyred Major, he was one of the earliest British historians. And although a lot of academics don't like his work because they don't trust it, and they use it for the negative side of it rather than the positive side of it. He also influenced a guy called Bede, who was an Anglo-Saxon priest who lived during around about 673 to 775. So Bede's early writings were taken mainly from Gildas, but they're accepted because they come from a different different background, shall we say. So the difference between those two writers is that Gildas says that that Christianity came to Britain during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, which was who died in 37 AD. Bede says it came during the time of King Lucius in the year 169. So there's a difference of 130 years between them. But it's still a very early date for Christianity to be recognized anywhere in the world, really, from Rome and so on. Then you have writers like St Clement, who was the Pope after Linus, circa 9100. He said that Christianity came to Britain. You had Justin Martyr in circa 103, who also said the same. Irenaeus in 177, Tertullian in 200, and Origen in 240. All these early writers state that Christianity came to Britain with Joseph of Arimathea, or around the time of Joseph of Arimathea. So
and where is the written record? Where's the written record kept? Where are the books?
These are all freely available in different writings, different books. So they're not hidden.
No.
It's not a hidden history. It's just an ignored history and discredited. Because if they can't accept it, they try and discredit it.
Yeah. And a lot of that writing came up in your thesis?
A lot of this writing came up in my master's, yes.
It did. So you've seen the actual texts? And...
I researched it, yes. I researched it. So I have to, when you do a master's, you have to put first-hand, original stuff and then secondary stuff. The original writings are the original translations of documents, and then the secondary ones are the people who comment on those original writings. So we have to cover it, otherwise it wouldn't be passed as I wouldn't get my grades.
Yeah. So what language were they written in then?
Most of them were Latin or Greek. Certainly Latin. And there is a Greek inscription in Caerleon, which was found dating from the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, which is in Greek, and it says something around the lines of "May you live well in God."
Wow.
And it's attributed to a Christian writer.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Any Coelbren, ancient British alphabet?
I didn't research that. That wasn't part of my remit.
Part of the remit, right?
Yeah.
Did you find any at all?
Not that I can remember, because this
Right.
is 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, so I can't
Yeah.
remember. I haven't even looked at this since that time. So
It's a great opportunity then.
it's a good opportunity to revisit and try and see if there's anything around in that. But there is Coelbren and elsewhere around South Wales. What we must remember in South Wales, one of the recognised writers on the subject internationally states that there was something in the region of I think it's 39 colleges and universities like Llantwit in South Wales, and 37 churches around about the same time.
Yeah.
So in what is termed the Dark Ages, Wales had so much knowledge and so much. Llantwit Major had princes and royalty coming from all over Europe to be taught here.
Wow.
It wasn't a dark age.
No.
It's an ignored age.
Yeah. Well, I know that Alfred the Great, the Saxon, supposedly sent to Wales, Ireland, and Scotland for people to educate his countrymen.
Yeah.
Because they didn't write at that time, did they?
They didn't know. But that's not saying that there weren't people who could write. I mean, I would imagine that people like Caradoc I mean, Marshall tells us of when he was captured in his journey to Rome, being hailed as a hero all the way to being marched to Rome. And then when he got to Rome, he went to the Senate and spoke in Latin. So these weren't uneducated men. We weren't backwater people.
No.
You know, we had been trading with Europe for centuries, you know, and Caradoc cousin went to Rome to ask Caesar to come and invade Britain, you know, to put him back on the throne.
Yeah.
You know, so to say that we were ignorant, painted savages, with, you know, is totally untrue.
Yeah. There must have been quite a lot of bishops around in those days then who left their mark. I've heard names like Alban, and I've heard an Aaron, and there's a Julius as well. What have I heard about them? Well, put them into context.
Bishops in those days aren't like the bishops that we know today, because the Welsh church, the Celtic church, it was known as the Insular Church. There's records in St Patrick's writings where he makes 13 of his cousins and brothers bishops in one day. You know, so in one council, and I think it was in the fourth century, they had to call a council to stop bishops being made bishops, because anyone could become a bishop. A bishop, you had to be a bishop in order to baptize someone in the early days, unless you were the abbot of a monastery, and the bishop came under the abbot. You know, so any royalty who didn't, you know, the second son, you know, couldn't be the king, went into the monastery and became a bishop, basically. That's why most of the saints that we know are from royal families.
Right. And what about those three I just mentioned?
Those three, well, yeah, they're interesting characters, particularly St Alban, because it's very controversial. We are told that in one writing, and I haven't got the writings to hand, you know, where they came from, that St Alban died under Geta Caesar, or under Caesar, not under Geta Caesar, but the only Caesar around that time was the son of the governor, Septus Severus, and he went off to fight the Picts in 208-209, leaving his son Caesar to be governor while he was away. Now, that's the only Caesar that ever governed, you know, ever governed Britain, and that was only for 2 years, so for 1 or 2 years. So St Alban must have been beheaded under Geta Caesar in 208-209. The other thing about Alban is where he was crucified, or where sorry, I keep using the word crucified, but where he was martyred, because according to the records, according to modern tradition, he's St Alban's outside London. According to a lot of writings, the place that he was the place that he was martyred was on a river bend, on a big river bend, in a Roman fortress. Well, there was no fortress on the Thames. There's no bend in the river at St Albans. So there's a lot of suggestions and a lot of evidence to say that St Alban was actually martyred in Caerleon. And that his teacher, the one that he's supposed to have hidden, his teacher is Saint I don't think of his name now, but it was Amphibalus, Saint Amphibalus, who taught Alban Christianity, and who Albion was supposed to have hidden away from the Romans when they came searching for him. His church was actually in Caerleon. And there's written evidence to say that St. Amphibalius' church is located there still.
Wow.
So Albion could have been, more than likely, was executed in Caerleon.
Not in the town that bears his name,
Not in the town
but
that
in
bears his name.
England.
No, because
Right.
the other thing is, when the Angles and Saxons invaded Britain, they were pagans, so they destroyed any any building of religious significance. So any shrine to anyone would have been destroyed. So when they say that St. Alban's shrine is still there, it's virtually impossible.
On the 200s, yeah. I got you.
Yeah. And likewise, Anna and Julius, who were recorded in Gildas's writings, Gildas's writings as people of wealth. The only time that they could have been executed, and it does state that they were executed in Caerleon, would have been around about 260, because after 260 there was Gallienus declared Christianity a legal entity, and the Romans left Caerleon by about 280, 275, 280. So they must have been executed before then. So it shows that Caerleon is a very highly Christian society. Certainly large pockets of Christians there amongst the other people. And the Romans tolerated them. There's no big evidence to show that the Romans governors in Britain ever persecuted the Christians to any great extent, even though the governors, the Caesars made them, an illegal religion.
Right.
There's evidence to show that 2 church houses were destroyed in the period around about from 303 to 311.
So where does St. Patrick come into this then? You mentioned him earlier.
Well, St. Patrick, he's another figure that was educated at Llantwit. They say that he was from a region on the west coast of Britain. But again, I've read books that suggest that he was born in Bondleston or Botherton, one of those 2 regions. But anyway, at that time he would have been a Briton, because anything on the western coast from Strathclyde all the way down to the Isle of Wight until the 6th century, 7th century was British.
Yeah.
So he would have been a Briton, but his grandfather, his father was a deacon, and his grandfather was also a member of the church, but a minister or something. So the date of Patrick, which just have a quick look at my notes so I get this right. Sorry about this.
All right.
I have to refer back to my original manuscript. But he was late 5th century. So by the time you trace back, mid 5th century, about 460. So if you trace that back to his grandfather's time, that was around about the Council of Owls. His grandfather would have been born. which was 311, 315. So again, it's proving continuity of Christianity in this area.
Right.
So Patrick because they know that Patrick's writing was written, a lot of his books were written by him himself, so that they know that the story is true and that the dating is more or less true. And he states that his father was a Decurion, or his grandfather was a Decurion, which is the same as Joseph Arimathea was supposed to be a Decurion. And what that generally meant, it didn't, although it's widely speculated that it means someone who deals in metals, it's actually a councillor. And a councillor in those days would have had to have, for their village, they would have had to supply the taxes. They would have had to guarantee taxes from their village. So if their villagers didn't pay up, then the Decurion had to pay for it. They also had to have an army, so they could protect their own villages and send them off to war if the local government asked them or demanded that they send people off. So the Decurion would have had a lot of money. They would have been wealthy people. Patrick came from a wealthy family, as was Joseph of Arimathea. So yeah.
Where was that council again? You didn't catch the name of the council.
The Decurion. The
council.
It's a council member. Yeah.
Oh right. So he was a. And what was the? You said there was a Council of Ars or somewhere. 311.
The Council of Ars was called by Constantine in 315, 311, 315, somewhere around by there.
How are you spelling Ars?
Arlles, I think it is, or a single L, double L, I can't remember.
Right, Ars. Oh yeah, they are.
And there we had 4 bishops represented, well, 4 people, 3 bishops and a presbyter present at that council. And again, we find in the literature that when King Lucius was asked for help from Rome, they sent St Fagan and St Duvan over, who were doctors of religion. They weren't just normal priests. They were highly educated doctors of the religion, which is there are not many doctors of religion in the Catholic Church. You have people like John of the Cross, and you have probably 20 throughout the history of the Catholic Church, doctors of religion.
Wow.
So these were highly educated men who came over to re-establish Christianity under St. Lucius. And one thing they did was to set up bishoprics. Bede says that they set up these centres for the bishops in York, in London, and in Caerleon. So when the Council of Ars came along and Constantine asked for bishops from all over the known world to come there, the 3 bishops that went were from Caerleon, London, and York, which were the 3 main provinces of the Roman Empire in Britain.
Right.
So yeah, it's all proving that South Wales was very, very active in the Christian faith in the early centuries.
How did they organise the church then? You mentioned deacon, presbyter. That's different ranks of clergy, that is, isn't it?
Yeah, the nearest we can understand the church in Britain at that time is to look at the Greek Orthodox Church. It was more akin to that than to the Roman Church. They had arguments about Easter and the way they cut the tonsure on the hair, and various other little bits and pieces. But also the other difference was that the bishops weren't created by the Pope. They were created by, you had to have 3 other bishops to consecrate the bishop. So a bishop wasn't, in the early days, a bishop had to be there at the baptism. So he was the only one that could baptize. You didn't have priests as such. You had presbyters, and you had deacons and so on who looked after the houses, looked after the church, and the presbyters would go around virtually like the priests of today. They would go around to do services in people's houses. And it caused a lot of problems in France and so on, where they came up against the Catholic religion. And in this country, right the way up to the 5th or 6th centuries, it was as I said, in the 5th century, I can't remember which council it was, but they actually called a council to try and control the bishops. And even at the council of Llanbrevy in Wales, I think something like 144 bishops turned up from Wales.
It was a big organisation they had then.
Yeah.
What's the date of that council, do you think?
Sorry?
What was the date of that council with the 144 bishops turning up?
That would have been, and let's see, it would have been, so St David's is supposed to have called it. So it would have been in 500, early 500, late 400, something. So he was supposed to have called that meeting together to try and sort the situation out. Because as I said, people were going around baptizing, making bishops out of people who had no religious experience whatsoever, just because they were their brothers and cousins and so on, to give them an income, because a bishop would get an income off the people.
Did your thesis go into actually what sort of Christianity they were teaching back then and how they started it?
I did cover that, not, only as a sort of a side part of it. Obviously with the reading I was doing, I had to look into that sort of stuff, and it was more on the teachings of Paul rather than Peter. Peter was the Roman Catholic way, Paul was the insular way, and it was more on the lines of the Jewish tradition, mixed with paganism, mixed with what we would call paganism today, but in those days Druidism, because pagan is just a Roman term that meant any religion wasn't state controlled. So Christianity was pagan when it first came out until 311. So it was a mixture, because it was also they allowed women to come into the priesthood, into the church. Monasteries would have male and female combined, even married monks and married bishops and so on, which was totally against what the Roman Catholics had.
I've heard they called it the Apostolic Church. What does that mean? Yeah,
I've heard that as well, but I don't know what it means.
It's something to do with the apostles, the way the apostles thought.
It was because Peter was highly, he was associated with Britain from the very, the time of Cradock.
Yeah.
He appointed Cradock's son Linus as his successor as Bishop of Rome. So he's very good friends, apparently, with Bran and Cradock himself, and enjoyed coming over here to have a holiday with them and talk business, I suppose.
Which one was that now? Because you froze there. And was that Peter?
Sorry, Cradock and Bran. Bran being a high druid. And Peter would have had, Paul, they would have had a good conversation about the similarities between Christianity and Druidism.
So you think Paul came over to
possibly.
Britain as well then? Is
Sorry?
that what you think? Are you saying Paul came over to Britain as well?
Yeah, Paul definitely came to Britain.
I thought
Um,
I'd heard that one of the letters to the, like he writes to the Corinthians, etc. One of them is actually talking about Britain, isn't it? Or saying
yes,
going to Britain, but it's not called Britain in the letter, which is the confusion.
yeah, I know the one you mean, but I know he also addresses a lot of his letters to Claudia and Prudence, who Claudia being the adopted son of Claudius, who was Caradoc's daughter. Quite common in those days to adopt a ruling, a conquered king's daughter or son, so that they could marry him off and try and make a bit of peace with other rulers. And she married a guy called Prudence, and they fathered Saint Prunella. The church is still standing. It's the oldest church in Rome.
Yeah, Saint Prudencia, isn't it?
Prudencia,
Yeah.
that's the one.
Yeah,
Um,
but they've got the catacombs underneath and all the martyred Christians in there.
those catacombs have the sarcophagus of Paul and Linus. You know, he's said to be buried alongside Paul.
Linus was Caradoc's son, wasn't he?
Yes.
And so he was in that Villa Britannica, which became St Prudencia.
That's right. Yeah.
And so Paul is buried underneath there as well as Linus.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Linus was the first bishop of Rome, wasn't he?
He was the first apostle,
non-apostle.
bishop of Rome.
Right.
Although Peter and Paul are said to be the first bishops of Rome, and that's a bishop, not the Pope. Pope didn't come in until much later.
Yeah.
Peter and Paul were supposed to be the first bishops, but Linus was the first person made a bishop who didn't actually meet Jesus.
Right.
Well, Paul didn't meet Jesus physically. I mean, he met him on the road to Damascus.
Yeah.
After the crucifixion, which is another thing altogether, whether you believe in the crucifixion.
Another line of talk as well. We could spend another night on that one.
Yeah.
But I don't think that was in our remit for this evening, was it?
It's not. No.
So what about Caradoc then? Do you think he was a Christian?
I think he converted to Christianity.
You think so? There's a green man's face carved into the rocks in the catacombs underneath St. Prudencia's. And I thought straight away, well, that's a nod to Caradoc.
Yeah.
And not Noggin as well. A nod to Caradoc in his possible druidic pagan religion as opposed to Christianity.
Yeah, and right the way through, even to the buildings of the great cathedrals, they had green man type faces as a nod back to what they would term pagan origins, the Druidism, the other religions.
Yeah,
because most of these places were built on sites of other religions, so they wanted to appease the other gods just as much as they wanted to appease their own gods.
Yeah. Well, the story points from Caradoc taking Christianity to Rome, having been captured by the Romans. So prior to that, the story is that Joseph of Arimathea converted Caradoc's family, if not Caradoc himself, at Llanhillyd. Did your thesis cover that as well?
I did cover that, yes. There's not a lot of solid proof on that, but there is obviously the triads and other writings, and the fact that in one of the biblical texts, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, Joseph of Arimathea and Aristobul are told to come to Britain, and Aristobulus is supposed to be appointed the first bishop of Britain, I think it's James. No, it can't be James. It's one of the you know, the written text from the disciples. Sends 13 disciples out, and 2 of them were sent to Britain. That's Joseph, Arimathea, and Aristobulus. Now, Joseph was known when he got here as Ilid, the man of Israel. Aristobulus has another name as well. He became the first martyr because he wandered out of the security of the Silurians to teach and try and convert the pagans outside, and unfortunately met his death. But Joseph had a long establishment with the Silurian kings and their wider family, because everyone says that he was a trader in precious metals and lead, and well, Wales had a hell of a lot of lead and copper, in particular copper, which the Romans needed to make the bronze. Lead was okay for water, to carry water and stuff, but if you wanted to make weapons and you wanted to make statues, you had to have the copper to go with it. And the Great Orme was the biggest copper mine in the world at that, the known world at that time. So they wanted the copper from here. They wanted the lead mines. They wanted the metal, the gold mines even from. So we know that the Phoenicians traded metals, particularly lead and copper, from here, and took them and sold them to the Greeks and Romans because they found ingots stamped, and when they look at the carbon footprint of the lead, they know it comes from Britain. So there's a long establishment. So it's very highly likely that Joseph's family were traders in metals. The Phoenicians, when the Phoenicians are around, he wouldn't have been able to trade because they kept their trade routes very secret. But a lot of the lead went across France down to Marseille, and then across from Marseille across the Mediterranean over to places like Israel and so on, Rome and so on, and other major places. His family must have got their money from somewhere. I know that he was from the line of David, so he wasn't a pauper in the first place. He was royal family, so he would have had a lot of contacts, and even over here he would have made friends with the people he was buying the stuff from. And
it was a natural place for him to visit then, escape from Rome.
And apparently, there's even evidence that his sister or his daughter was married to one of the Craddock's brother or cousin, I can't remember where it is, but up towards the Midlands.
Right.
And if you look at the churches of Ilid's churches, if you plot them from Llanelid in the Vale of Glamorgan, just outside Pencoed. My cat is hungry and he won't eat what we've given them. They sort of make their way up towards the Midlands.
Right.
Up through the Brecon Beacons to safety. Maybe that was when the Romans turned up. He decided to find his way up out into security, because according to the Bible, he was a wanted man.
Yeah. So do you think he's buried in Cardiff, in Cooper's Field, just outside the castle in the
It'd be nice to think
Church of
so.
St Mary?
Again, it's this big thing about Avalon. Where is Avalon? I don't believe it. Personally, I don't see any shred of evidence that it's Glastonbury.
No.
But there is, that plot of land that he's supposed to bury on Blackfriars behind the Cardiff Castle, that was an island at one time, and it was an apple grove as well. But islands were always sacred to the Druids. So, was it Anglesey? Was it Bardsey? Was it Skomer Island or Flatholm or Steepholm. It could, you know, there's even a suggestion, and I went to stay with monks on Caerleon Island. And I was waiting, the monk I became friendly with is Father Gildas on Caerleon Island. And he lectures at Lantrit every year on the date of St Illtyd's Saint's Day. So he comes down, he does a yearly lecture there. And his interests are in the ancient histories of Wales. Fascinating character, really fascinating character himself. Ex-hippie, ex-Buddhist, and turned to become a Christian monk. But while I was waiting for him in the library there was a book about community, building community. It was all about the monastery on Caldy, which of course is linked to Llantwit Major, because Samson became the second abbot of Caldy Island Monastery, and Samson was trained by Illtyd again. So I was reading this book and I was looking at some pictures, and there was an altar picture prior to the fire that they had there. And one of the cornerstones, the altar was made up of foundation stones from monasteries that had been dissolved during the dissolution of monasteries. And they were all monasteries that were Benedictine, which that monastery in Caldy is Benedictine. And I was looking at it and I thought, what's that there? And there was a cornerstone and it said Glasbury, or Glaston, anyway, it looked like Glastonbury to me, or Glaston, that's it. Glaston, 57 AD.
Wow.
And when he came in, I asked him about it. I said, is this from Glastonbury? He said, no, it can't be, because that monastery never belonged to us. It was always a different order. So I got the book upstairs with the photograph in it. And
well, we'll have to dig that up. Yeah.
I have to try and find out where that monastery is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they talk about Glasgow or something or other in the Wilson and Blackett books, don't they?
Well, there is a Glasbury up above Hay on Wye on the Severn.
Right.
It did have a monastery, and it also had a bishop. It was a bishop see. So, so it must have been an important place. But no one knows where the monastery was. You know,
no. Is that where St David then found found the altar that was supposedly carved by Jesus and encased it in lead? That was at that place, apparently.
Was it?
Apparently, yeah. But it's interesting, that one. It's Bob Morgan on the site investigated Lan Anthony Priory, because it's that area we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, that area we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. So that brings us back then to Caerleon and Caerwent. And one thing you said to me some time ago was that you unearthed a first century Christian church, and you had proof that it was such.
Between the first and second centuries, it goes back that far.
Can you tell us the story relating to that then?
Yeah, of course. We have to remember that the early Christians as well would have looked to the Bible to see what they would have, where Jesus taught. So Jesus taught in the open air. He taught in people's houses, and he taught in porticos and stuff. He never taught in a church, except for when he was a youngster, and he taught in that one time in the synagogue. He never taught in anywhere enclosed unless it was a person's house. So we have to look at churches in a different light to what we see churches today. And one of the things, obviously, the Druidic way of preaching was in what we now call a llan, or they called a llan in those days, which was an area of land, a clearing, usually round or oval shaped, which is where we get llan as in church in Welsh today, because a lot of the old churches were built on llans.
Right.
And when we come to that, that relates also to Llanillid, because there is the llan still exists outside Llanillid Church. And if you walk on, if you climb up into the llan, you can see that it's an amphitheatre. It's not a house, it's not a castle, it's not nothing, you know, what the archaeologists haven't even excavated because they're not interested in it.
No.
It's an oratory. Someone sitting in the middle of there could speak to hundreds of people sat around the banks and get his message across, just like the Druids did, just like Jesus did. So when we come to Caerleon and Caerwent, there's lots of, they know that there's a house church in Caerwent. It's house number B22N, and they say it dates from the 4th century. Now, the 4th century being 300s, so we're looking at the time of Constantine and that type of thing. If you also look at Aaron, St Alban, as we mentioned earlier on, from 209 and 208, 209, and that relating to Caerleon as well, then that house church was probably a lot older than what they say it is, or there was another church prior, a house church prior to that. So we know that we can date Christianity in Caerleon to 209. Now, we come to the archaeological evidence now. There was an orange lamp, or a lamp of orange ware, I should say, with a chiro carved into it. Do you know what a chiro is? That's it's a cross with
circles around the end.
If I can find one here, I'll show you now.
Right.
So that is a row cross, right? So it's a cross with a P for Pax, sort of thing on top. And a chiro is a different type of cross in the fact that it's that way instead of a. So that is a chiro cross.
Right.
So this piece of orange ware, the lamp of orange ware with a chiro, is dated to the end of the 1st, the very beginning of the 2nd century. So we know that the Christians were there at 209 because Albion was killed there. This piece of ware dates it even further back because it stopped being used at the beginning of the 2nd century. It was in use up until the end of the 1st century. So we're back into the 1st century now with archaeological evidence.
So that's crockery, is it? Orange ware?
Yeah.
Like
also, there was a piece of amber found there. This piece of amber had a fisherman on it with a fish. And Clement of Alexander, who lived between 150 and 215, he told everyone that they should wear one of these as a ring. So this piece of amber is out of the ring. So again, that dating it back to we're into the 1st century, the end of the 2nd century, 180, 90, something like that. So then after that, there's that Greek inscription that I said to you about, and there's also some glassware which comes from the 2nd century. So from a stone building point of view, we have a time period of 100 to 200 AD in the archaeology, accepted archaeology. Now, if St. Lucius was, well, St. Lucius was, I should reframe that. St. Lucius was a Silurian king. So his home would have been here in Gwent and Glamorgan, probably Caerleon as the king of Gwent and Glamorgan. We know that Bede dates him to 167 AD. And he says that Bede says, and Bede doesn't follow Gildas in this. This is a completely separate piece of evidence from Gildas, from Bede, I mean. I'm just trying to find my note on it. Bede says that, yeah, I can't place it at the moment, but it was a piece. Oh, there you go. It states that St. Lucius asked for help from the Pope in the year 156, at the time when Marcus Antonius Verus reigned with his brother Aurelius Commodus, and they only reigned for 4 years together. 156 fits directly into that 4-year period. So, and that's from a piece of writings called the Catalogus Pontificum Romanium, and that dates from 353. So, you know, very close to when the thing was written, you know, when the event happened. And by the title, you can see that it's the letters from the Pope of Rome. You know, so it's in the Vatican, recorded that in that year, 159, Bede saw this document, he copied it, and 156, I mean, Lucius asked for that help. So Caerleon is Christian at that point in time, 156, which is when St. Fagin and St. Duvan are sent over, as we discussed earlier. Doctors of the church, very highly educated men. St. Duvan's church is in the Calcutta in Barry, and St. Fagin's, we all know where that is, with St. Fagin's Museum.
Got a museum there, haven't they?
Yeah, so can't argue with the facts that these people existed. These people came here. They you know, the academics would tell you no, they didn't, and that these people were such and such from 2-3 centuries later on. Yeah.
So what are you saying? You're saying then is that the archaeology that is currently accepted as 400 odd AD as a home church was actually a church back 200 years earlier.
Archaeology accepts it to be mid 300s.
Mid 300s, right?
So, but the archaeology of small finds takes it to the 1st century.
1st century, right? So we're talking about Caerleon now and not Caerwent.
Caerleon.
Oh, my mistake. I thought it was Caerwent.
Caerwent is the church house, right? So the church house was found in Caerleon. That's Caerwent, sorry, house number V22N.
V22N, yeah.
And
that's in Caerwent.
That's in Caerwent.
Right.
Because Caerwent was the administration center for this region of the Roman Empire.
Right.
You had 3 administration centers. You had Caerwent, you had York and London. They were the 3 main administration centers. Yeah. And as such, anyone who was put to death by had to be charged and convicted at one of these centres, because they were the only legal administration centres. If you
Right.
were in the army, you could be executed, but if you were a civilian and you had charges brought against you, it had to go before someone like a judge. And they only
When you mentioned Caerleon earlier, then you perhaps meant Caerwent, did you?
no, Caerleon did. Caerleon, they found in Caerleon, they found the ring.
Yeah.
And they found the glassware.
Right, right.
But the two centres are so closely
They are
linked,
close together geographically, yeah.
you know, so people were traveling from one to another and, you know, maybe praying in Caerwent, but living in Caerleon or whatever.
Yeah. So what you're saying, there's small evidence shows that Christianity was in that small area
In the first century.
in the 1st century, and if the building was used as a home church in the 3rd and 4th century,
We have
it
to
would have been used similarly in the 1st century.
we have to remember that Christianity until 260 was an illegal religion under the Roman. So what you'd have is house churches, if they had the money to build, you know, to build these places. Usually it was just a small shrine in those days, and the family would worship in front of that shrine. But when it became more relaxed, and Britain was always a bit more relaxed than the rest of the Roman Empire, in the fact that most of the governors didn't, once the fighting had calmed down a bit, most of the governors didn't impose Roman law to the same extent on Christianity that other regions did. Hence, in 206 to 211, only 2 church houses were destroyed in Britain that we know of, that we found.
You know of, yeah. Wow.
Compared to France, when it was hundreds. France and the rest of Europe, the hundreds were destroyed.
Yeah. Well, that could be that the Romans never actually conquered Britain.
They never
A lot of
fully
people
did.
think that.
If they left Caerleon, one of their main fortresses and one of their main shipping areas, because they're uncovering this vast dockyard in Caerleon now that they say is Roman. It's probably pre-Roman, but then they left there at the end before the 279, 280, something like that. So even if they were there, they were only there for 200 years, 100, 200 years. After that, they didn't want to know the area. They made peace, I think, with the residents. I don't think the Silurians were paid off like some of the tribes in Britain.
No.
I just think they made peace with them.
Yeah.
Especially after Constantine, because Constantine was a British king. He was from a royal family. His mother was Helen of the Way.
Yeah.
So they didn't need to have legions sat here. In fact, Constantine took a lot of the British fighters away with him, and various other British emperors did as well. They took the fighting forces with them and left Britain weak. And which is one thing that Gildas says, that Britain was left to the ravages of the savages. The Irish, the Picts, they would just come over and take their pickings because there was no one here. And then the Angles and Saxons, they came in, and because there was no one here to protect the area.
Well, there's a lot of contentious thought now in this hidden history, and whether Jesus survived the crucifixion and lived out the rest of his life on this part of the island. There's a lot to talk about, but we'll leave all that for another time.
Well, yeah, they talk about Mary living on Lou Island, and marrying one of the chieftains there in Cornwall. Yes, it's a lot of contentious history.
We leave the contentious now for another night then. Well, thank you very much, Gareth. That was absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure that
I hope that people like what I put forward. And yeah, if if we get onto Joseph of Arimathea in a big way, in another one, then we can look at that totally different. But as far as leaving him aside, Christianity was definitely here by the middle of the 1st century.
Thank you very much. And that was the way you put across the evidence there. That was very interesting. I'd like to see that piece of amber, and I'm sure.
I don't know where it is. It's
Uh,
probably, you would have thought it'd be in Caerleon's museum, but I haven't seen it. But I don't know.
At least it's recorded.
It's recorded and it's
It's
evidence.
recorded. It's in writing. It must be true.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gareth.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Welcome.